Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters, for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. And today we have a special roundtable edition featuring a whole bunch of fractional technology leaders. So no particular order. From Toronto, we have Michael Gladstone, fractional CIO and business technology management advisor, helps mid-sized organizations align technology, processes, data, and people so IT delivers measurable business value. A returning face to the pod, Diana Piper in Calgary, pragmatic fractional CIO, CTO, Digital Governance Council Committee member with over 30 years experience across cybersecurity, AI governance, and enterprise execution. Back in Toronto, another familiar face to the pod, Stephen Pollock, fractional CTO for over 15 years, including founder side experience. And from Rothsay, New Brunswick, David Gallant, fractional CTO with decades of experience leading SAP, VMware, and global service transformations. Today's episode is sponsored by the fractionalproscanada.ca directory. Scaling a business in Canada is hard enough without the high price tag of a full-time C-suite hire. Most CEOs I'm talking to need high-level strategy to break through, but they don't want the overhead, the long-term risk, or the 6-month recruiting cycle. And when they ask for a shortcut, I send them over to the Fractional Pros Canada directory, curated hub for vetted high-tier fractional talent like the faces and voices on the pod today, experts who step in, find the gaps, deliver ROI from day one. Instead of digging through generic job boards, savvy leaders go where the specialists are already gathered. So business leaders, find your next strategic fractional partner on the directory at fractionalproscanada.ca. Michael, Diana, Steve, and David, welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So we're going to cover a few different topics today. Kind of the overall goal of this pod, I want it to be kind of like a temperature check-in on the current state of AI as it's relating to businesses. You know, what's working, what's not, what are the big pitfalls to avoid, other AI wisdom that can help any business leader as they are continually navigating the fast-moving currents in the AI ocean. So let's kick it off with kind of an AI reality check. So we're living through an intense wave of AI promises, but there's always a massive gap between what vendor pitch decks demo, or in this case, what AI platforms, LLMs, and anything related is actually offering and promising versus what actually operates reliably inside a business. So I want to know from where y'all are sitting as fractional C-suite advisors, what is the cold, realistic state of AI capabilities today as you see them? And David, why don't we start off with you?
Oh, okay. Wow. That's a big loaded question. The clients that I'm meeting with are really trying to figure out, beyond the tool, where does AI actually drive value, in the organization? And I'm suggesting that better way to look at it is to treat it more like a traditional program than a project, or not a tool selection, but a capability that you're actually trying to unlock in the organization itself. And grab something specific, whether it's data centralization, which is a meeting I just came off with another client not too long ago, earlier this morning, where they're looking at rolling out AI tools, trying to pick the right vendor, but realizing that every prototype or every pilot they've run so far has run into the wall of, the data is not clean enough, or the data is not centralized enough, or it's too disparate. And so the results are getting back, could we say, are less than poor, if that's possible. So, I'm advising clients to be specific about the value that they're trying to achieve, not be vague, and then map program to that and the tool to the program to get the outcome they're looking for.
Diana? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, we lost Diana. All right, she'll come back. Michael?
Basically, to echo a lot of what David said, I was going to use the same terminology instead of in terms of looking at AI as a capability. I find that there's too much fear of missing out, and people are just running to, hey, we got to do something without understanding what the true capabilities are and what the use cases are. David, your comments about data and so on, that's a discussion that I'm having seemingly, every 2 seconds with everyone. And there's just too much rushing to say, hey, we got to make use of this because everyone else is, rather than understanding, the true needs, the true business needs that we're really trying to solve.
Stephen?
Well, I have a slightly alternative perspective, only because a lot of my clients are actual technology companies, not specifically, shops in major corporations. Although the most recent one, which Diane would probably be familiar with, is Sinchi, who's a vendor trying to provide governance solutions for AI, and I've been doing a bunch of work with them. I think my approach is maybe a mix in the middle. Like I always like the idea of trying to give somebody a familiar paradigm to use to figure out AI, and if they don't do that, they're really going to be in the wilderness forever. But if they can come up with a prior experience that they could say, oh, if I operate AI just like that, then I'll maybe get to a better outcome. So if you remind people about what their, cloud computing adoption experience was, or any of those sorts of things, then they can start to potentially draw some parallels about what challenges they're likely to come up with as time goes on. I think the biggest issue, as I see it, is AI is, super powerful. My most recent experience with all the Mythos stuff is it's like exceeded what I thought I could do to get confused by AI, and put that in the equation. And the news headline yesterday of OpenAI's problem with AI just on its own doing a bit of a Skynet breakthrough into something, tells us that we're not yet ready for it to be unbridled in the mainstream. And then if I just briefly here to finish up, circle back to what David and Michael was saying, if your data isn't good, when you look at AI and how it works, and if you think of data as part of the prompt, then if you're giving it garbage in, then you're going to not get garbage results. You're going to get how it interprets the results, and it's going to go off and do whatever it does. So, we're kind of cycling back to things that people have ignored for years, which is if I don't have clean infrastructure, if I don't have good handle on my data, if I don't know my business processes well, if I don't train my people well, on and on and on, bringing AI in ahead of schedule is probably an emerging disaster. And I think my own forecast, when I look at it on the vendor side, is the next 12 to 24 months is going to be nothing but disasters for many companies, because they are often well ahead of where they should be in bringing in something that's perhaps like other stuff, but doesn't operate that way. Like API layers is one of the analogies. It's not another API, even though it operates that way. But it's not programmatically rigid, and that's a problem.
So it's back to basics. Don't forget the business fundamentals. Remember the last transformation. How did that go? What went right? What went wrong? And learn from that, because at the end of the day, this transformation is going to kind of follow the same pattern.
Absolutely.
Diana, you're back.
I'm back.
All right, let's see. So anything to chime in on as far as the reality check of what is the realistic state of AI capabilities today as you see it?
Yeah, thanks. I actually, sorry about the hiccup there. I think what's happening though is we've certainly seen this with digital transformations. Organizations are wanting to leverage AI, but it's really understanding what they need to do and have the foundational pieces in place to make it happen. And I think with the speed they're trying to get to, I think there's a bit of a lack of understanding of what that looks like. lot of individuals that I'm talking to, whether it be CEOs or other CTOs, there is a fast track they think that they can get to. And the reality is they really need to do the work to ensure that they keep the solutions secure, they keep their data and their sensitive information protected. And I think today, because of that speed, not understanding that is putting a lot of organizations at risk, and we need to step back and understand what that really means to them.
There's always this temptation as we're sitting here with current state, which these days means not even today, but this hour. We know what the best things are out there. We're sitting in the C-suite going, oh, we should be on this because this is going to give us biggest bang for our buck if we implement it.
Uh-huh.
Without thinking about, putting the cart ahead of the horse, et cetera, et cetera. So, Stephen, you were mentioning you were playing with Mythos and it was way beyond what you felt, what you expected it to do. The temptation is, well, let's implement that now instead of what we were implementing up till now, because it's going to be even better. But that's just falling into that trap, right?
Yeah, an interesting sports analogy would be, you put 10 people in a canoe with 5 on each side, and then you drop an Olympic athlete in the middle as one of the paddlers, and what's going to happen? You're going to go in circles. That's been my experience. Well, putting AI in your organization as like a super employee, very capable, works around the clock, never complains about anything, is definitely going to make your organization go around in circles. So you need to have those other 9 seats, properly filled with people who know how to deal with someone who paddles that strongly, in order to keep the boat going straight. And most companies, they weren't prepared for that in the past. It's just like, overhiring the wrong employee, wrong level of employee. You mentioned that earlier, Robert, in your introduction of the Fractional Pros Canada group. People who hire the wrong type of person tend to make the boat go in circles. So AI is the same, and you have to pick where you can paddle down the river nice and cleanly, and start there. And any step forward is a good one if you do it right.
Love to hear some shares from any of you if you have client experiences where you have seen implementations of something AI, whether it's LLM or some AI powered app that has turned out well, is producing results, and is actually having some bottom line impact.
Yeah. Actually, I can speak to that. Some of the clients that I've been working with in regards to how they've looked at it, they've actually done it through experimentation. Part of this is really taking a look at where they can actually apply AI, doing the experimentation, and then understanding how they scale it. Because I think part of the issue here is understanding where actually AI can work. The reality is when we take a look at AI of how we implement it in an organization, we can accelerate our staff. We can also accelerate our solutions, and understanding where that is and the inputs and the outputs of how it works is really important for an organization to understand what they need to change. And AI, like a digital transformation, is really about change management and understanding what needs to adjust. And if we don't have that understanding and we don't experiment to understand where that needs to shift, we often don't understand. We find those gaps, we get those vulnerabilities, and we see the unsuccessful endeavor that they started.
So
Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe I
Uh,
can chip in too.
I'll
Yeah,
send
so
it.
they,
So I've been working with a client that's in real estate investment, and one of the things that they really were struggling with prior to adopting AI is contract management around the different properties that they buy, and then on the facility side, leasing the different components of those properties out, making sure the contracts are consistent, client to client, partner to partner, and so what we did is we implemented a contract review process that is governed by AI. And so AI looks at every inbound contract and every outbound contract, and it looks for anomalies in the contracts. And that's a job that typically is done by, you know, junior lawyers that join the firm. And those junior lawyers were spending, on average, 2 days just going through one contract, matching it up to another contract. AI is able to almost effectively eliminate all of that time. So it has access to the entire repository, all the contracts using Ignite MCP, paired up with an LLM. And those tools working together actually eliminate all of that time. Doesn't eliminate any of the junior lawyers. It actually empowers those junior lawyers to actually get their work done much faster. Their error rates are way, way lower, like 80% lower than they were prior to adopting, this AI. But one of the things that we found that was key to the successful rollout of the project was we had to go in and make sure that they had standard contracts. And I mean, really standard contracts. Like any other organization, and by the way, the 5 of us all have lived through this as well. You think you've got a series of templates, whether, Robert, it's on your side, market brands and stuff like that, we've got a branded proposal that we use. We've got a branded, whatever. And on our side, it's like vendor contracts that, MSA agreements that we establish with all the different vendors that we have or partners. We end up having usually a bleed out of standards in terms of templates. So, the key thing for us is actually establishing one core repository of what we call the standard template, and then have a succession plan for that repository when the business adopts a new template standard. So, but having that in place, being able to drive that model, now we have junior lawyers able to produce the work much faster, much less error, more trust in the overall process. So when they go to invest in a new property or they go to bring in a new client, they trust the process and they're able to delegate the decision further down because they trust the process.
When a
Sorry if I can, Robert. David,
Yeah,
I like that one. I think it's a good example of using the extra rower in the boat properly and safely. Maybe with the one exception, you still want oversight, because I know lawyers will be the first ones to know that you can't go into court claiming AI didn't find that problem, so therefore I'm all good. But there was one that sort of came out of that, because I was actually involved in an example from a different perspective on the same issue with lawyers. Collaboration is one of the things that's shifting almost silently sideways in a lot of organizations, because people who are using AI are forgetting that they're not collaborating with their team anymore. They're just collaborating with their chat agents. And they're producing documents or artifacts that they're kind of presenting as final. And there's very, very little chance for a team to kind of back up and go back to the beginning and say, I have some feedback, and then go through that iteration cycle again and again. And I've been trying to counsel companies to watch that as they go, especially, new hires who come out freshly all tuned up with AI, like they had their spreadsheet calculator years ago.
Right.
They will be so used to working alone that it'll be hard for them to fit into a team environment where they want to, benefit from all the rowers in the boat. They'll just assume that they can do all their work on their own with their own collaboration agent, and away they go. I don't know where that problem is going to get solved, but it is an important one. I think that's going to, start to show up more and more and more in organizations that are successful in allowing copilots and chat GPTs to come in and turn everybody into individual workers, which is really not what you want.
Yeah, I to both your points, one of the things that I've been writing on in my blog series is keeping human in the loop, and then creating evidentiary cycles. So again, kind of thinking from a legal point of view. Even though I'm not a lawyer and I would never pretend to be one, although I did stay at some Express Hotel last night. It's keeping the proper process in place that we've had all along in business critical application thinking, of having that audit trail, the evidentiary trail to say these are the actions that I took, here's the reason why I took it. In accounting principle, it's the journal entry. In legal, it's the evidentiary trail that you follow. But I think with AI, you need that built into the process. And the good news is it can take care of it itself, right? But you still have to have the human in the loop on the other side to be able to say, like, something didn't happen correctly here. How do I quickly do root cause analysis and figure that out? Well, that's where the evidentiary and the audit trail comes into that process. In terms of the collaboration, you can actually have AI start to kind of I won't say force the collaboration, but support collaboration between the different humans that should still be in the loop by creating communication cycles through those different humans. So they're kind of, I can't always use the wrong term, but forced to kind of go back to each other and collaborate, even though it might be through the agent or it might be through the chatbot or, whatever mechanism, but really reinforce that what I call the knowledge cycle or the knowledge layer, and build organizational intelligence around AI as the core center component of that.
Yeah. But I think going
Yeah.
back to, and I totally agree with you guys, I think what we need to understand or help people understand is AI is just a tool. It's not an expert. And I think often when people go and they get information, they artificially develop confidence that every time that information comes back, that is correct. And the analogy I give is if I talk to a colleague, I need to use my critical thinking to understand, is that correct or not? And I think when we talk about those junior individuals, how do we bring back that concept of critical thinking? Because people are today, when they get an answer, all of a sudden believing what they say. And so I think it's really a mindset of how do we use AI information as an output to help us in the process. And I think, David, you mentioned earlier, the process doesn't change. Just because AI gave us an answer doesn't necessarily mean we run with it. It means we have to consider it and then have that other process follow suit. So in your example of a junior, we still, without AI, would have someone more senior validate their work. We still need to keep that process. It's just the going from point A to point B is shorter. And I think if we can help people understand that really we are accelerating work, but we're not creating better work, that they don't have to have those checkpoints in place. And I think that's where I think there's a misunderstanding when we talk about artificial intelligence. And I think when we create that success and some correct answers, people start to all of a sudden believe everything they start to read. And we start to think that we don't have to embed human in the loop. And we really do. And we need to understand where that fits in the organization for those checkpoints so that we end up making the right decisions or right recommendations or et cetera, that's wherever that process is is been implemented.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts sort of going down that path. I think the first one is that a lot of people don't understand effectively the inverse relationship between the use of AI and the risk of being wrong, right? Effectively, the more risk that I can take on of the result of this being wrong, the more that I can rely on AI. If I have to be guaranteed to be right, then that's going to reduce the amount that I can rely on AI. And I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations don't have that understanding. And then tied into that, this is a discussion that I seem to be having every day now, is people not understanding that AI is not deterministic. And they attempt to use it to solve explicit problems that are by nature deterministic. And then say, hey, how come this worked 99 times but didn't work the 100th? Because that's how AI works. And they try to solve the wrong problems. They sort of conflate AI with automation and say, oh, wait a second, AI is the tool available to us to automate anything, when that's not the case.
Yeah.
That's definitely not the case, right? Yeah. You can use AI to help you build a deterministic process, but you can't have it replace the deterministic process. It doesn't work today, right? I wouldn't say it's never going to work, but it definitely doesn't work today.
Well, there's a big push, as I see it now, to, as an example, do model choices on behalf of the user, both to manage cost, but also to correctly use the underlying components, the sort of so-called skills libraries, in
Yeah.
order to implement the right thing. So if you want the perfect world, we're probably saying that in the future we have to Venn diagram together traditional API implementation of workflow with AI implementation of workflow, and the AI kicks in when we reach the edge of what the APIs can do, because the APIs are engineered deterministically, or at least they're supposed to be with good programmers, and then AI can kick in the rest. So, part of this project I'm doing with Sinchi is to sort of help solve that kind of problem. in the future. And I think that would be a really great place for this to go. Plus, it'll also reduce the cost issues quite a lot, because almost everything your average person does can probably be done with traditional API stuff on the business workflow stuff. Versus your example, David, is best done by AI, because it'll definitely with in a very robust way find out what the possible things are you should explore in contract differences. Absolutely. I love that kind of example. That's a great one. And a lot of how I use it is to just remind me of the things I should remember to think about, because I'm getting older. And I've perfected, I think, how to do that. And then I produce my artifacts, based on what I learn. And that's great. It's safe. And it's like having a mentor. It's like me hiring myself to do work in a younger version of me.
Yeah, I did something similar where I created a root cause analysis agent that helps me just make sure that I follow a standard process to do root cause analysis. And I'm always like surprised that, like, well, crap, I forgot step number 7. I can't believe it.
Ah,
It reminds me, hey, we didn't fill in the data for step number 7.
oh,
And
yeah.
I go get the data and away we go, right?
I thought
So,
of note, David, you mentioned in your example that AI reduced the error rate to 80%, reduced
by
the error
more
rate
than 80%. Yeah.
right, more than 80%.
Yeah.
But still, that's not 100. That's not even close to 100. I think that's
No,
really, important to call
exactly.
out, right?
Yeah.
AI helped, but it didn't do the whole job. You still need that
Yeah.
human in the loop. I like to say you need the human in the lead.
You always need a human in the lead. Yeah, I think that's the point that, like, a lot of marketing around AI is kind of missing right now. And then we also have the fear mongering around AI, right? That it's going to replace every job on the planet. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, and then we've got influencers out there saying, I've built an entire AI sales and marketing team, right? And it's like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, but you're pushing like the boot camp that you want me to buy for $2,000 that I'm going to spend 3 days for you to show me
Yeah.
how to do nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's those examples that are really creating the funk in the, what is the real movement, I think, which is we want human in the lead, we want human in the loop, we want it to be human centric, but we definitely want assistants to go get our things done better, faster, and cleaner than we did before. And I think if we stick to the tenets of, I mean, kind of what's the point, right? If we're not here, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, and I could get really dour and say the entire economy collapses, but and I don't think that's going to happen. But I really think if you keep human centric, human in the loop, it's you can still get things wrong, but you're steering in the right direction at least.
And just to leverage that, I think what's happening in industry, a lot of organizations are trying to extrapolate that and put that and relate it into their business. So when we see Oracle or Microsoft and going back to, we don't need software developers anymore, and the reality is we do. They may be doing something slightly different, or we may have to augment what they're doing. But the reality is they often say, well, if Google doesn't need it, or if Microsoft doesn't need all of this tech support, I don't either. Or if I'm reducing my business because they have mature processes, where they are on the scale of maturity is significantly greater than most small, medium, even large organizations. And so it's really understanding those foundational pieces of what they need to have in place, because what ends up happening is they hear that, and we've seen that with a few organizations that totally reduced their workforce, and they failed. And they failed because AI can only, work when we understand. And if we don't understand, it fails. And that's what ends up happening time and time again. And I'm certainly seeing in the conversations is when we don't have that full picture, we think that we're going to get that benefit at the end, but we haven't done the work to get there. It drastically fails. And and even moreover, talk about the right people, we don't know who to have on our team to make sure that we know what right looks like.
Yeah, I think executives are recognizing that mandating teams to just funnel more money into AI is really overlooking an important fact, which is that we still don't fully understand how it fits into workflows and is going to impact the existing jobs and might require the creation of new ones. There's so much in motion. It's kind of like a new drug coming out on the market. Ozempic, GLP-1 drug, right? It's showing great results. You lose really quickly. You lose weight really quickly. All of a sudden now there is a pill that can help you lose weight really quickly. But it's too early to know what the actual long-term effects are going to be? What are the side effects? What are the actual risks of going down that rabbit hole? And I think this is something that is really overlooked a lot. So I want to let's focus a little bit more. We've already talked about some of the big pitfalls. What are, if we want to do like a top 3 of the biggest mistakes that business leaders are making when they're just, assuming that AI is going to maybe revolutionize a department or make this process more efficient or increase revenues by 20% with a combination of efficiency and just doing whatever we're already doing now even better. What are those biggest errors, mistakes that business leaders are making, which just end up disappointing and leading to a bigger mess than they had when they started off with? Michael, you want to hop in there?
Sure. I mean, I'd say that the number one that I see is really just rushing in and trying to assume that that AI is the answer on day one without understanding what your current processes are, what your data, the quality of your data is. If you don't understand your processes, if they're not standardized, if you can't document them and so on, you sure as hell can't automate them. And it's unfortunate that so many organizations are willing to say, hey, we're just going to automate what we have today, without even understanding the complexity of that. Get your processes down pat, understand what they are, and then you're in a position to look at automation and AI.
Yeah. Just to jump on that, you talk about, I think in industry, it's been well recognized, the 80-20 rule. And with AI, it can't apply anymore. We can't afford to not understand what that 20% is. And I think we need to shift our mindset to understand we need to know it because we don't know what the risk is. It's about those unknown unknowns. And most organizations, from a perspective of understanding where all their data is, understanding all the systems, understanding where their unstructured information is that potentially is being leveraged. When we don't understand the foundational pieces, we end up not knowing what we're going to get at the end, and taking that risk can be huge from a litigation perspective, huge from a competitor's perspective in their brand. And I think sometimes they think they're willing to take the risk, but when it hits them, all of a sudden they have to take that step back and start looking at it from a point of view you just suggested, Michael.
Okay, and Diana, I really like that point about the 80-20, because if you think about that 20, if you take AI out of it, right? When you hit that 20, your process may fail, your systems may fail, something like that, but you hit some kind of roadblock. You all of a sudden put AI in and AI hits that 20. It's not going to say, I don't know. It's going to say, here's the answer. And, very likely that's going to be the wrong answer. And you will have no idea that that's the case.
Exactly.
Another interesting part of this, which sort of ties together how people think conventionally, engineering has been the biggest problem with AI because it appears to be so much more successful within the engineering framework than it is in any other part of the organization, which is a false sense of security to, I think, everybody's points. Companies, like engineering can largely be way more deterministic than most other business workflows. That's kind of almost its nature. And engineers are themselves, at some level more trained to deal with AI. So companies that I know, we're just friends that work there, whatever, their advances in automating workflow and engineering are way ahead of anything else in the rest of the company. They're telling the company, look how good AI is, and they're just assuming that they can replicate that level of saving, automation, and speed up everywhere else, but the rest of the business is very non-deterministic, compared to engineering. So, it's Claude Code is actually a problem, even though it's also a benefit because it's creating this false sense of security. The 80-20 rule, just sort of one quick comment, and then I'll turn over. The 80-20 rule, if I get a chance, I often tell companies, deploy AI on the 20%. Forget about the 80. Your business already does the 80. If you can get the 20%, if you can reduce it to 15%, likely that 5% is a huge uplift. And in product management, I tell that all the time. Most product managers only do a small percentage of what the actual role is. And if AI can give you personal productivity so that you can reach 80% of what a product manager should really do, you're going to benefit the whole organization. So it's an interesting place because you can deploy it more safely with a many orders of magnitude benefit if you focus on the 20 of the 80. It's hard because everybody wants the cost savings and all the other myths that come with it, but it would work that way if you try it. And I know in my own personal use of it, that is what I'm doing. I'm trying to do better at the things that I would often just gloss over because I don't have time to do them.
David, what's at the top of your list of the biggest mistakes you see companies making when they're...
Well, I'm actually going to pick up on what Stephen said there, because not around the 80-20, but actually around, a friend of mine who's a chief executive at another company. He made a recent decision that because engineering was doing so well with AI, that what he would do is he would, launch Claude Code and Claude Cowork out to his solution architects, and they would see the same benefits, right? And his announcement to this group was, and I can't believe he actually shared this with me, but congratulations, you're all developers now.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, you really think people are going to be, and they empowered themselves with that aspirational goal of having already achieved their nirvana of becoming an engineer simply by receiving the tools, right?
But isn't that where this is going? Where somebody with
Absolutely.
no dev experience can now, in plain English, but create the greatest app in the world?
And they were writing some of the greatest apps in the world, each and every one of them. In fact, the outcome of it was every year this company has a hackathon type event where you get to show up with your great idea. Then if you win the contest, you get sponsorship money. The number of people that showed up with a great idea was a 600-fold increase year over year. And when you dove into the actual analytics and figured out, well, how did these people develop these great ideas? How did they get the prototype? Almost exclusively, like with 100%, they were all developed via AI tools, whether it was, standard LLM, or it was, Hugging Face or Lovable or Base 44, right?
For companies who don't think in that way and hear that, I'm sure there's a CEO or a founder who's thinking, how do I get my team to start thinking like that? And is the answer emulating, what they do in Silicon Valley? Hey, all employees, as of today, I want you to spend 10% of your time playing with AI, and here's all these great tools for you. Go develop some apps. Is that the right thing to do?
I've worked in Silicon Valley for most of my career, right? I've worked with SAP, I worked for VMware, I've worked with Silicon Valley companies, like almost all of my career. And the difference between, I'll say it wrongly, run-of-the-mill business versus a Silicon Valley company is there's a culture, a heritage, and a structure that's built around the actual innovation cycle that you're referring to, Robert. And so we have things that, I'll steal a term from a company I used to work with called Take One, Take Two, Take Three. And it's really the incubation of ideas where, the individual employees of the company get gifted time to be able to go and work on some type of a construct of a project they have themselves. But it's well governed and really well governed. Like, there's a mentorship process that's in place. There's an organizational group inside the group that actually helps you and supports you through that method. They would never just be given the tools and just told, okay, you get a day, a month to go work on whatever you want.
Yeah. I worked in I worked in two organizations, a little bit different. One was actually, and this goes back 30 years or so, where, development was new. For some of you here, you might remember Forte, you might remember some of those novel languages that came out at the time. And an organization I worked at, they actually gave the teams funding. And it was very similar to what you said, David, which was they would show up and whoever had the best app, and created a little bit of a competition. The problem was you had way too much investment. People had to relearn. We didn't really have the right structure in place. And then I actually worked with another organization where they actually went to the employees and said, hey, do you have an idea? And very similar to what you described, it wasn't that they did a prototype. What they did was they actually shared that idea, and they actually presented it in a professional manner in front of a committee, which was already established. It determined where the merits were. They had conversations. They determined which ideas were going to move forward. And this was an organization of roughly 100 and some odd thousand. And they wanted to have that innovation, and they created a pipeline in order to do that. But what's really successful about that was, and the point I was going to make in regards to what are organizations not doing well today, is that they think only 1 year out. In order to look at innovation, in order to look how doing something differently, we really need to understand what are our goals 5 years from now. And that whole concept of 5-year planning has been replaced probably, I would say, the last 10 years or so with 1 year. And so what ends up happening is when we do our annual reviews of what projects we're going to do, we only talk about them annually. We don't look at it as, and I think I can't remember who said, from a program perspective. I was portfolio manager for a large organization for a long time. We need to understand, it was for an engineering team, and I'd like a electrical and mechanical engineering team. And we needed to think out longer term. But today we only think out to, with Agile, we are only thinking out 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or a year. And then we want to be able to shift, but we don't have the mechanism in place to say, should we shift or how do we shift? And I think it's really putting organizations at risk because we're not thinking long term, especially with AI. You have to, at some level, to understand what we need to do. And so, I think from a perspective of strategy, that's one of the biggest gaps I'm seeing in the conversations I'm having around what are you thinking beyond that 1 year? Do you have the right people? Are you understanding what tools you need to place? And do you know where you're actually putting them so that you're actually being able to build scalability in those? And often the answer is no.
So, Robert, a good commercial for Fractional Pros Canada, because that's the role we have. We're supposed to, anyways. Hire me for a few weeks, and I'll come in and talk. Just put a 5-year lens on your thinking process, and leave you behind some guidance. You may ignore it, but at least that's where our experience is.
I was going to say, I do most of my work with American companies and companies outside of Canada. I would love for them to put a 1-year plan in place. Most of them don't even have a plan for the next quarter. And 5-year planning is dead. I gotta tell you, 5-year planning is it's absolutely gone. It's not even in the lexicon any longer. And I understand why most companies can't plan for 5 years. But I think the way that we get to the point of being able to plan for at least a year or plan for 5 years is we have to start separating again tactics from strategy. And, the more boards I talk to, the more C-suites I talk to, and as I'm listening to them go through their planning, what I'm hearing is a lot of tactics that are being spoken about in the form of strategy and very little strategy. So yeah, they're not listening to a 5-year plan because their brain just cannot get out that far. And oftentimes they use the excuse of, well, everything's going to change inside of a year, or the U.S. market is so fragile or volatile that, we can't afford to think that far out. We have to adapt to what's right in front of us. The other excuse, we're all talking about it here right now, AI is moving so fast, we don't know what it's going to do 3 months from now, let alone a year from now or 5 years from now. I've even heard, well, what's the point of doing things 5 years from now? AI is going to do everything in 5 years anyway. So if AI is going to do everything in 5 years, what's the point of even planning it? I'm planning an exit in 3.5 because it's going to replace me. So I'm just going to worry about today.
That's kind of like, why bother making my bed? I'm just going to mess it up again tonight.
I'm just going to mess it up, right? Why take the Christmas lights off? It's Christmas is coming, right?
Yeah.
But David, you touched on something which I think is perhaps the most fundamental question of all of this, which is AI a tactic, or is AI a strategy, or can it be both? And I don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure who.
Yeah, I think it's actually both. I've written on this lately, right? And I've said a couple of things, right? I think we know they're tools that are inside the capabilities, but we actually also know that those capabilities are really describing what we should drive as a program, and not just a project. It's okay to have projects inside that program, and I think that's the proper structure that we need to look at. But I think so many people are treating it just like a tool, and that is one of the real fundamental problems. I just described the CEO said, "I'm going to give all my solution architects access to this," and then they'll suddenly become, engineers, right? Well, that's actually, turning the capability into a tool, and if I just give you the tool, suddenly you'll have magical powers that, will gift you the ability to become much more than you are. That's not treating it as a program. That's buying a tool, right? So we're really treating AI like we're buying, Microsoft Word or Outlook or Miro, or, I mean, you go on anywhere down the list of any software tool we have, right? Claude, Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, they're all being treated as if you're buying another tool or a suite of tools. And really, we're not looking at the purpose of why are we buying those tools, right? Any reasonable person would not go into, Home Hardware or Canadian Tire, and without knowing what tool they're buying and what the purpose of that reason of that tool is, right? Otherwise, everybody would buy the hammer, right? When you really need the screwdriver, right? And so that's what we're fundamentally making the mistake of right now.
I think, David, the historical analogy is the spreadsheet. If you want to look at it loosely that way,
there we go. There it is. Our hammers,
example,
knife, fork, right?
Full available to everybody. And I met people recently who do they pre-do their calculations on their phone, and they enter the results to the spreadsheet cell because, to them it's a printing document, but people who have learned how to use it as, proper modeling tools, and if it had continued down that path, many, many more things would have come on top of Excel, that help run businesses, but it just didn't as a tool. Giving everybody in the world a hammer and a pile of lumber doesn't make them house builders. And Excel was a good example of that. It didn't in the end become the thing it probably was originally could have become. And I think AI is that way. To me, it's a similar path. So I like that comment.
Yeah, Michael, if you want to see something interesting, join the Excel global community, right? And I mean, you'll watch the most beautiful things come out of Excel, but it'll warp your mind and go, "Oh my Lord, why?" Like, it really has become that universal tool. It's amazing what some of these people have built.
Michael, AI tactic or strategy? What's your take?
I think, so for us, like, we work with small, medium businesses, like operating companies. We generally don't work with tech companies. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. And Stephen, back to the sort of the comment about, the use of the hammer and becoming a contractor and things like that. The thing that I'm really seeing is like, hey, just because we should be doing this, or just because we can be doing this, should we be doing this? And really the question becomes, well, hey, we are a manufacturer. Do we want to become a tech company, right? Just because we can be vibe coding everything and so on, like, is that really the business that we want to be in? I was reading a post, I think it was on Reddit just a few days ago, this guy saying like, hey, I spent the weekend and I was able to, I'm not a coder, I was able to build something to replace a $100 a month widget, right? And he started getting attacked, and I think rightfully so, saying like, hey, that's great, you're not actually saving $100 a month because it's going to be something less than that, but have you even given any thought to what happens from here? How do you enhance it, support it, and things like that? And it just reinforces like, hey, you're an operating company, you're trying to run the business. Do you really want to be out there starting to become a tech company and taking on all of the responsibility of that? Never mind in the near term, in the long term.
But I'm going to push back. Let me just push back, because we're talking about a company who's implementing AI all of a sudden becoming a tech company, or telling their right. And is that where we're at now, where businesses are just drifting across that line into tech company territory as soon as they start really integrating AI into their daily business?
Not just AI, though.
We're talking about, but I don't think it's new, right? And I think some of us have seen this story before, right? Remember when we got .NET, we got Visual Basic, we got C#, right? We got Python suddenly became the cool tool to use, right? Every company out there suddenly looked at all the suite of software that they had and they said, well, wait, we know our business the best. Why don't we develop our own in-house tool and in-house software? And I got to tell you, like the number of clients that I ran into for probably the next decade with SAP who had developed their own components of an ERP platform that were complete garbage and came to us because they were complete garbage. And like you can't recruit the same level of engineer and developer as SAP. You're never going to be able to do that. Like, you can't recruit the same level of developer and engineer as Google and Microsoft or Amazon. We've already cornered the university, so you're only getting the next tier down, right?
Mhm.
And so to say I'm going to take my operational company that builds cars or builds planes or trains or digs in the dirt and whatever we do, and turn that into, I'm going to distract myself by going and replacing my entire business suite of application software by in-house stuff that's now AI driven, and you're falling for the same fallacy and you're going to get the same outcome.
Yeah.
I think
I've said,
you're at risk of being even worse off because, David, to your examples of the earlier state, at least you had developers building things. Now you have non-technical people that are copying and pasting that have no understanding of what it is that they're building, and how are they going to keep this thing up to date? How are they going to maintain it? Like all of that, they're in an even worse state because they don't have the experience.
Yeah, that's why I love the analogy game. So, people said they needed data centers long ago, right? And they realized what a complete fallacy that was, and I need to dump mine out unless it was a true differentiation.
Yeah.
Same there. I think that this got talked about early in AI. What happens if you have to go backwards? I've let go some people. I've replaced them with AI, and I realize now that isn't going to work. How do I go find those people to step back in? Again, the analogy there is actually, strangely enough, coding. It's very unusual to find a developer who could work with somebody else's code. So if you're starting to build all your infrastructure, vibe coding or whatever you're doing with AI, and then somebody else has to come in, even if it's just to fill a 2-week vacation spot, and somehow figure out what you did with AI and how you went through that vibe coding exercise and how you produced this in order to make changes, no chance. That's again a lesson that was learned long ago, and that's why pair programming was around, and that's why
Right.
all of those agile methods were there in order to allow teams to work better together and replace each other and fill in for each other in specs and strategies and plans and architectures. Those are why those were there, and they proved themselves many times. And I think people are losing that lesson.
but there's
Yeah.
been a shift from my perspective. Like when I take a look at, back 30 years ago, technology teams were at the forefront with the business. We often worked very closely. And there was a shift, I'd say, back in the 90s. And part of it is needs were growing, technology wasn't keeping up at the time. And yes, that's where the Excel spreadsheet came, because a lot of us had to download a bunch of data so that the business individuals could collate that, because they actually understood the relationships between them, and they created their spreadsheets and they did their numbers and they presented it to the executives. Where we are today, though, is, and I see it in education, we have students who are graduating who understand tech, but they're not tech. And so today we're now at a place where every aspect of our life, not just our professional life, even our personal life, is becoming automated. We are trying to look at efficiency, and everybody's playing a part of that. But where I see, and going back to your comment earlier, Robert, you asked about some of those big gaps. There has been a division of who's at the table making those decisions, and tech leaders, more than 50% of the time, aren't. So they're a partner. Sorry, they're not a partner. They're often a service. And when we have those organizations, and it happens in mostly small, medium organizations, because they don't have the dollars to bring in a C-suite, we want them to bring in a fractional, right, to help guide them. And that's why we're having this conversation today, so that they can make those right decisions, or they need to understand those questions they need to ask to get there. Because what's happening is when we put all of our, going back to your example about someone, in the business saying, I'm now a developer, they're now relying on that. We often talk about citizen development as something I've been talking about for a long time, which is really governance and having users do things. When we have shadow AI, when we have shadow IT, which has been around for such a long time, that is creating a lot of noise in our organizations about what we can do, what we can't do. And then the state we're in with stuff all over the place and not understanding what we have. So, the biggest gap I see, not just in the planning, but having technology leaders at the table right from the start. I was in a session about a year ago of startups with educational institutions have hubs. They're trying to create that innovation. The question I had is, are you helping them to understand technology? And the answer was no. And I went, do you understand that how an organization looks at the technology role is right from the start? That's where culture starts. So if we have those owners, we have those founders who don't look at tech unless they're tech, because, the tech innovation has CTOs, but business doesn't. They often think they can do it. They can create, and we talked about it before. What ends up happening is they grow without having tech leadership, and they end up with the issues that they have today. So, to me, where we need to really help is raise that visibility of that fractional role, having them come in, helping them understand how they can strategize, creating that strategy, and then what does that tactical side look like for them to be successful in scaling and going from an extra small to a small, from a small to a small medium to a medium, so that they're successful and they're not always having to re-implement and do a digital transformation every time they grow.
Thank you,
And
Diana. That is like the best place to leave this, where you just made the case for why fractionals, in this case, fractional CTOs, need a place at your table, business leaders, at your C-suite table. If you don't have somebody who's got that strategic value to add, this is why we exist. This is why the Fractional Pros Canada community exists. Let's wrap it up with our traditional last question. If you could put one message on a billboard for millions of business leaders and fractionals to see as they drive by it on the highway of life every day, what would that one message be? Stephen, we're going to start with you.
What would the one message be? I would encourage people to embrace it, but embrace AI. So if the message is, embrace AI, I might have to think about how to make that succinct. So let's start with, I'll just leave it as embrace AI.
Embrace
'Cause
AI.
I don't want that not to happen. It just, the sides of it all running in different directions, different speeds.
All right, Michael.
If I can expand on Stevens, I'd go with something like embrace AI, but it's not the answer to every problem.
Embrace AI, but it's not the answer to every problem. Okay. David.
My billboard would probably say, it's going to be okay. We've been here before. I know how to get there.
It's going to be okay. We've been here before. We know how to get there. All right. Diana.
Yeah. Actually, Robert, you asked me that before, and it's changed. Having gone through and worked with a lot of leaders in AI, my billboard would say, governance is an organization's newest asset.
Governance is an organization's newest asset. Great.
That's a good one, yeah, because it gives you confidence that you can go forward ahead of your competitors who aren't as far along the line, which is the Cinci project.
All right. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, take a second to like, follow, subscribe now to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. Stephen, David, Michael, Diana, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
It was enjoyable meeting everyone.
Yeah, nice meeting you guys.
You too.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.